This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You Are Special. Now, we're all going through that maze of life, and you're not going to get out of it. And especially if you are a parent. Um, Boy, many of us think what at least I did when I was younger. Oh, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have a house, I'm going to have kids. We're going to just be this happy, wonderful family. Well, it wasn't quite like that. We weren't a really unhappy family, but it wasn't that picture perfect that I had in my mind. And I have two sons from different marriages, 15 years apart, totally different. So my parenting skills were different. And yet, my parenting skills, if I look back at them, Sue, something I read in your bio that you learn not to be the screamer, I think you said. Wow. I think for the first 20 years of my youngest son's life, that's the only voice I remember coming out of my mouth.
Mhm.
So you got a little bit smarter than I did, a little earlier than I did. So tell me a little bit about what made you decide that you had to look into parenting and some other ways of doing it so that you weren't the screamer, so that you had a happy, content family.
Well, I was a yeller because I'm an entrepreneur, so I make all my own decisions. I'm a doer, I execute at a high level because if I don't do it, it doesn't get done. And then, we had our first child and then we're surprised with triplets on our second attempt. So I went from 1 to 4 kids overnight and it was super overwhelming. I mean, it would be overwhelming for anybody, but especially for a type A woman who just do it because I said and be happy I asked. Like I didn't have a lot of experience with kids. I didn't know a lot about psychology or how to reach them or just that state of mind of where you're starting with a blank slate that this little being is depending on you for absolutely learning everything. So I was yelling a lot. My husband did say, honey, you're yelling a lot. But, as we do, we justify that. Like, well, of course I'm yelling. I have 4 kids under 4 and a business and a husband who is in the military deploying. So, of course, I'm yelling. But then when my throat started hurting from yelling, my husband was very kind about gently telling me I'm yelling a lot. And then once he put that into my head, I started noticing it. And then it kind of culminated with my oldest just kind of glazing over and looking at me with these big blue eyes and like the more I yelled, the more he just sort of detached and looked at me like I can't, what are you doing? It was almost embarrassing for me. Um, and then there's always the fact that yelling didn't do a single thing that I needed it to do. So I'm a quick study, right? So, by the time my oldest was about 5 and the triplets were 2, I had them in a Montessori school and they were offering a parenting class. And in the Montessori practice, it's very about accountability and allowing kids the freedom within boundaries to make choices and to be accountable. And once I saw what they were capable of doing in the class and what that I was not actually, I was doing all their laundry and making their lunches and doing everything for them and then pissed off that I was doing it. And then I learned the Montessori way and then started learning some tips and tricks and how to approach my kids in a different way. And then started studying behavior psychology. And so I went and kind of brushed up on child psychology and behavior. And the funny thing is that as a salesperson, the parallel of how I approach customers and even how I approach my husband in a relationship is very similar into how you approach a child, but the nuance is a little different, so you do have to learn. But for me anyway, early on it was about trial and error. But the number one thing that I say is putting the mirror on yourself and going, I know I have to change, and that's where there's a big disconnect with books and parenting, is that we are falsely told we have to change the child's behavior when the truth is that the child is reacting to us. We think we're reacting to them, and then we're taught that we have to change the child, and that is not what works. So until we learn new ways and we understand that we have a problem and we show up differently to affect a different behavior or a different outcome, nothing's going to change. So that's
No,
what brought
yeah.
me
And
learning.
it's interesting that you say that because um, with my first son, I was in a fractured marriage. And so I was trying to be that good mom, but he had the Disneyland daddy.
Mm,
And so I became the mom that you're going to do this and you're going to do it and you're going to do it this way. And he was, he did it when he was with me because I think he wanted to please me. But I could see the relief on him when he'd go to be with his dad on the weekend. It's like, oh, I don't have to worry about any of this anymore. Um, and it was many years later that he said that to me. I'm glad you taught me how to do these things, but
oh,
I
good.
wish you had taught me differently
Oh,
because I did them to make you happy. And
yeah,
um,
not you
and it's
understand the
like,
why.
oh, that's not why I was teaching you. I was trying to teach you because you need to take care of your things if you want nice things and
Mm,
whatever. And my youngest son was identified on the spectrum when he was 6. Up until 6, he was this happy-go-lucky kid, had all these friends. My husband and I had friends. And then he turned 6, got diagnosed. Nobody wanted to play with him anymore. Parents didn't want to be around us. And
mm,
so my husband and I became very hard because not that we were blaming him, but in some way it was like this is your fault. And I
uh,
didn't realize we were doing that until he became a young adult.
oh,
And I share this only because I want parents to know you're going to make mistakes along the way. But if you can learn from them and resolve those mistakes, life can still be good no matter how old your child is when you make those changes. My
mhm,
sons and I have a great relationship now. Um, you know, I don't expect anything of them. They don't expect anything of me, but we do for each other. And that to me says, hey, I did do some things right in those growing up years. But
mhm.
as you started doing this research, especially in psychology sometimes, you know, is very black and white and tells you how to do things. And yet you have 4 different children, so to speak.
Mhm.
How did that work for you?
Well, again, what ended up happening was I realized that I had a sort of built-in innate ability with psychology, with reading situations, reading people and applying and meeting people where they're at. This all sort of came to light for me as I was parenting. So parenting kickstarted what I already had skill sets to do, but was applying it in sales at that time. So reading the people, reading, what do the pre-qualification, all of that. I had a natural skill set that I was then able to apply to my kids. And so I didn't really see psychology as being black and white. To me, it's a trial and error. It's just ideas to apply because psychology can be however you interpret it and however you apply it and however you apply it to any child who's different. So one idea might manifest in one way, and with another child it manifests in another way. So when I talk about freedom within boundaries, um with my oldest, the freedom was a lot bigger. The boundary was wider and I had a lot more freedom. Now with the triplets, I needed to have a tighter boundary with a less freedom within that because there were 3 of them and they all had the same friend group and they were all pushing the limits a little bit more. And, they were just all these different kids. And so again, you can take any kind of concept from psychology and apply it in a gray way, right?
Right.
To whatever child and whatever they need. You can still take the same idea and make it applicable to them.
So one of the questions I asked you before we went live was, so you have 3 girls, right? They're
No, I
triplets.
have 2 boys and a girl.
Oh, okay. So that's even a little bit more confusing as triplets. At least
Well,
for
what
me.
happened was, so two eggs dropped and one split. So we have identical
Got
boys, and
it.
so two separate eggs,
Got
but
it.
then we got one splitting, which is highly unusual, but that's what happened.
So, but most of us, when we think of twins, triplets, multiple birth, we think, oh, they're all like they all like the same thing. They're all going to look the same. And the reality is that's not true. Even when they're identical, they're not 100% identical. Um, and this must have been a big change for you, like you said, going from one child now to
Mhm.
four, and being a military wife, being on your own a lot, and a businesswoman. So how
Mhm.
did you know how to juggle all this? Did you take those business skills and put them into play, or
Oh, 100%. Again, as a solopreneur, entrepreneur, however you say it, I'm very organized. And I did end up writing a book, and in one of the chapters, I talk about, do you have a process or do you have a system that works? And I'm very good about organizing and keeping everything as consistent and regimented as possible because that's how I stayed functional. But it also is the way to make children feel safe and confident. Because when a child knows what to expect, if they're in a chaotic environment or things are always changing and they don't know what to expect, then you're going to start getting pushback because then they're confused and they feel like they have to, in the absence of discipline from the adult, they have to take over at that point, and they think they have to take over and start, fighting and resisting. What we take that to be rebellious behavior, but in fact, I do teach parents to look at the environment, look at the patterns, and ask, what can you change to give your child that steady, consistent lifestyle so that all the rest sort of falls away? They don't feel like they have to start misbehaving or rebelling because you've got it under control. So I did apply a lot of the same business techniques that I do to just being my own business into the home, and that was really kept a well-oiled machine. And that was important for the kids and for me to be successful.
it's interesting because when my youngest was growing up, my husband and I were both working in IT. One week he would travel for business, I was home. Next week I would travel, he was home. We have totally different parenting styles. Um, and he depended on his mother, who was a doting grandmother, to be around when I wasn't around. And she was wonderful and I loved her. But I'd come home and my business style, which I brought into the home, was totally different for our son. And he never questioned it until he went to college. When he was in college, he said, I really resent the years when you and dad were both traveling. And I
Oh.
said, well, one of us was always home with you. And he
Hmm.
goes, but you were so different. Do you know how
Wow.
confusing that was for me?
Yeah.
And didn't think about that. And
Mhm.
it was like, my first reaction was, as a parent, and I'm sure there are parents out there who are going to say the same thing, I felt guilty. It was like, oh my God, what did I do to you? And
Yeah.
he said to me, it's okay, mom. What I learned from this, if I ever have kids, I have to be more consistent. And that's
Mm.
exactly what you talked about. So he knew what he needed. And I think he sort of adapted, he created his own consistency when his father and I were on different levels. So, how do you help parents understand that? Because a lot of parents today, they're both working, they're running in circles, they want to do all these extra things, and consistency sometimes falls off the wagon.
Well, it's really just explaining to them and helping them see, because when you're in the day to day and you're just living in this vacuum and you are stressed and overwhelmed and you don't know what else to do, so you're yelling, you're doing the same repetitive things, you know it's not working, but you don't know what else to do. Sometimes this is why I coach, is because sometimes even just a 30-minute conversation where we sit and talk about what are your patterns. When do you find yourself yelling? What is the child doing? Let's read the room Let's learn how to be intentional. And I call that parenting in advance because we're stopping and taking stock. We'll have a conversation about what to look for. What are the triggers in terms of, are you finding that you're yelling when it's early in the morning and you overslept and you're tired because you stayed up too late? Let's back up the action so that we can understand our part of getting this child's reaction. Again, the child is reacting to us. So when a parent understands that by the time they come to me, they want the behavior to stop. So they're at a point of readiness to go, what do I need to do? And through explaining the process of their home and what goes on in the home and looking at patterns and how to interrupt them, it gives the parent a sense of control over, oh, wow, all I have to do is rearrange this, or oh, I just need to. So we work on one problem at a time. A lot of times they're coming to me and they're yelling, and that's a side effect of the real problem. Where let's get to the core of what's really going on, and let's start with one thing at a time. And then we break it down and then we solve one thing because this is what I teach is not only just hugely common sense, but it's super counterintuitive. And unfortunately, I don't know why the way that Montessori teaches children and the common sense ways of allowing a child to make a decision and be part of the family and feel valued as a valued member, that we don't need to be the authority all the time. I don't know why that isn't more common because our kids went from Montessori, where they were, negotiating fights between the younger kids and they were solving problems and they were serving their friends little ground up things that they were growing, then they went to public school and it was nothing but problems because schools are built on punishment, and they set you up they have these rules, and all they do is drill down on more rules. And there's such a counterintuitive way to approach children who are misbehaving. And I saw the night and day difference into the public school, and I just remember thinking, why doesn't everybody know this? And so that's why I've spent a lot of time working with parents, teaching parents, writing the book, whatever I can do to get the word out, because I think this just needs to be a more common approach to children.
Well, and I saw this also in the public schools with my son. So up until he was diagnosed, he was lead of the class. He was doing everything. Once diagnosed, the school basically pigeonholed him and
Mm.
said, well, because he's on the spectrum, he has to have an aid. Because he has an aid,
Oh.
these are the things that have to happen. And uh, he started acting up. The only thing that he had done to bring this to their thought pattern, so to speak, was during a fire drill. The sound of the alarm, he went underneath his desk rather than wanting to go out of the room. And we knew he had issues with high pitched sounds. The school knew it, but this was the first time they saw it. And right away it was, you got to go have him diagnosed. There's something wrong
Oh,
with you.
that's
And
terrible.
so the sad part was for almost 18 years, so from almost age 6 to age 24 until he was out of college and working, he had an identity that
Mm.
really did not fit him. And we were programmed by many medical people. This is when you have to stop him, and this is when you have to do this and that.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until he started cognitive therapy on his own,
Mm.
he came home. He said, do you know why I get upset over X, Y, and Z? And I said, no. And now we started having conversations because he was starting to understand things about himself. Whereas previously in therapy, it was to do this, you must do this first. And it'd be like, well, that didn't fit. That didn't fit his brain.
Mhm.
So it sounds like that's how Montessori is too. It's like, what is the natural way of doing something for you?
Right. And that's again getting back to what you said earlier, which is reading each child and understanding that, one approach for your older son isn't going to match the younger son. The other thing that I want to say, and I'm not admonishing you at all when I say this, but because the public schools are all about punishment and they're all about following all the rules and not explaining why, not giving any incentive why, I noticed that because I have three boys and three normal, healthy boys who are boys, they like to break things. They're fidgety. They got to get the energy out. They're different. Girls can sit and focus. Um, because I had three boys, I saw, and we raised our kids outside. They're playing. They're doing gymnastics. They're jumping around. They had that healthy outlet at home. I saw that the teachers had a very hard time dealing with normal, healthy boys. They wanted the boys to be more like the girls because it's more challenging to teach to children who have high energy. But this
Right,
is how a boy is, okay? So therefore, I saw this, I connected that dot pretty quickly and realized that I was not going to allow a teacher to tell me that a normal, healthy boy needs any kind of diagnosis because um, I mean, short of a true diagnosis, right? But this was just about behavior that they couldn't
right,
handle. Because I know that, how my child was behaving at home and all the systems, social cues, all of the things were happening. But I would move them out. I would get a different teacher. I would understand I was my child's advocate because I wasn't going to allow them to be labeled. And I'll give you an example. One of the triplets has a nut allergy. And but the way the public school handled it was, okay, well, this table over here is where all the nut allergy kids eat. And you have to eat at that table because we're going to control that table has no nuts. And that's how we feel safe. But, first of all, social part of school is the most important part for kids. They go and they
right.
sit with their friends, and lunch and recess are like the most thing that they look forward to. And so I made the decision, my husband and I made the decision that, like, no, we're not labeling my kid that he's going to forever be the kid that has a nut allergy. No, he can sit with his friends and be his own advocate. First of all, we're not sending him to school with peanuts, and the onus is on me to be the leader and tell him, do not take any food from anyone else, because he had the
Right.
EpiPen there, but we taught him, instilled in him his own advocacy, which, by the way, he was going to need as he got older. But can you imagine, what does it teach a child, or what does it do to have a sterile table? He's not learning to look around and go, what other food, how do I defend myself? So I had to go above and beyond, write a note, make sure they weren't held accountable, whatever, as the parent. At least they let me choose that. I was like, no, we're not doing that. And you know what? After about a year or two, the peanut table went away anyway, because other parents were like, well, I'm not doing that either. But similar to what you said about your son, I'm not labeling my kid forever, all through middle school, all through high school, that he's the nut allergy kid, that he can't sit with his friends. It just, these restrictive decisions are not conducive to independence, to creative thinking, to autonomy, to accountability. None of it is structured for a kid's decision making on their own and their own
Right.
advocacy. And it's just sort of a parallel example to what you just talked about with your son. So he was they were forcing you to go out and get him a diagnosis because we need a piece of paper. Well, your son eventually got old enough to say, no, this isn't me. This isn't who I am.
Exactly. And it's interesting because that was about the time that I decided to use my education, go back for my certifications, and started coaching because I realized that my husband and I and our son, we fell into this little mold for so long and we were fighting it. We were fighting it internally in our home. When we went outside, we were almost afraid to say anything because we felt that people were staring at us anyways.
Mhm.
Um, my son was diagnosed in the 90s. In the
Oh, I
90s,
was going to say, your son
yeah,
is older, so you were really charting a new path at that point. That was all very
it,
new. Like these
it,
days,
exactly,
it's not as much of a stigma, but yes, you were doing that with it was very much of a stigma.
exactly. And so it was because of his enlightenment, waking up one day and going, look
Mhm.
at, I'm qualified to do all these things. Yeah, sometimes I think a little differently. Sometimes I don't pick up on the joke that somebody has made. He said, but you know what? That's okay
Yeah.
because not everybody hears things the same way. And
Mm.
once he started doing that, I could do it. My husband could do it. And we could say, okay. And this is why I think coaching is so important today. Because, like you said, it gives the client that opportunity to talk about something that maybe somebody else doesn't want to hear or somebody wants to judge them on. But in coaching, there is no judgment. How is it working for you? What would you like to see differently? How would you like to react? If somebody would have actually asked me that in the first 20 years of his life, my
Mm.
first thing would have been, teach me how not to yell. I came from a house that with two older brothers and parents who had very loud voices. So I was the youngest. I
Yeah.
learned to be loud
Right.
and I
Right.
brought it into my marriage and into my family. And there are still days that all of a sudden I'll realize, like, Karen, you got to tone it down. And on my computer, I have a sign that says, how is that working for you? So that when I start to do these behaviors, I can say, well, what do I have to do? What's in my toolbox?
It's really funny that you say that because in my book, I do talk about that where I went to a parenting class, my very first parenting class, and the teacher went around and said, "Why are you all here?" And I was like, "Oh, I was ready. I had on a silver plate. She's gonna think you're doing an amazing job, and she's gonna tell me, you don't even need to be here. This is what I'm thinking, right?" So she gets to me, and I'm like, "Well, I have four kids under four. My husband is deployed. I have a business. Like it was always me, me, me. Like, I'm yelling. Well, of course I'm yelling. And she just immediately said to me, how's that working? And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, so that sentence completely splashed the cold water on my face, like boom, like, all right, not only am I shutting up, but I'm ready to learn. And that just completely set the tone for my entire class of like, I can justify all day long, but if it's not working, you need a new bag of tricks.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we talk about coaching, and what I wanted to add to what you were saying is that the thing, yes, I wrote a book. Yes, a lot of people have written a book, but the thing that's different about coaching is that we bring the material to life in your home. So you can read it, but they might not understand fully what parenting in advance means or how to interrupt patterns because we can't always see with clarity our own selves. So with coaching, sometimes all it takes is like a couple of sessions, and the parent is like, "Oh, I can." Brings it to life as how it applies to you, and that's where I think the real value is because it's so tailored and customized with the material.
Exactly. Well, I had a client not too long ago, and her first session was, tell me what to do, Karen. Tell me what I should be thinking. And I kept saying, no, what are you thinking? What do you want to think? What do you want to change? And she kept saying, no, I came to you for advice. And I said, I'll guide you. I will guide you. Because you know what? I don't know what's happening in your brain right now. So if I tell you, hey, I
Mm.
think you should do X, you could sit there and fight me. And I explained to her that when I was going through therapy, when my son was first diagnosed, and I had a therapist who kept saying, Karen, these are the things you have to do. And I went home and I was very upset. It was like, you're invading my life. A lot of
Mm.
those things I didn't feel comfortable with. And nobody said to me back then, how would you like to do them? How can you modify them? Is this important to you? And if so, where does it fall? And so the second session with this client, she started the same way. And I said, what do you want to do? She said, want to feel better. I said, well, that's good. We're on
Yeah,
the road.
better.
Okay.
Yeah, better.
Now, what is better? Tell me the one thing that is upsetting you the most. And it was the same thing I hear from so many moms. I'm yelling at my kids and they're not listening.
Yeah.
And so my comment is, well, when somebody yells at you, do you listen? Well, no. Okay. So what can we do differently? And yes, there are some kids that aren't going to listen to a calm conversation. And maybe you can't have that with them. Maybe you have to, you know, offer them a book. Maybe you have to show them a picture. Maybe you have to do playtime. There are so many different things that we can do. And I've even learned that with my young adult sons, that sometimes, I have to turn things into a game just to get the information that I might need from them. So tell me some of the things that you do with your clients that help set them free, because that's a big thing.
Wait, I'm sorry, that what?
Help set them free from
Oh, set them free. Oh, okay.
what?
Okay, well, getting, sort of building upon what you just said is that in every session, when I start with a client for the first time, the very first thing we do is we establish goals. So, what are your goals? And for the most part, there's a saying in sales that's like sell them what they want and give them what they need.
Yeah,
Right. So, what you think your goal is in our first session is very simplified, and it's usually not the correct one and I say correct, then they're not right and wrong, but correct for you. But
right.
that's okay. We're building a baseline, and your goal is this. And so then that launches the whole discussion about um, empowering. I'm a lot about empowering the parent. So even though I'm a parenting coach, we talk about changing the behavior of the child. That's actually the easy part. I spend a lot of time with the parent themselves, breaking their patterns, bringing what they bring to the table and how, they were yelled at or abused or punished or whatever are bringing to the relationship. One of the biggest things that I work on with moms is guilt. And, we are so split up and so divided into different emotional camps, and we're doing so much for everyone else. And we've lost sight of ourselves. It's funny because I have a story in the book, and I was just talking to one of my kids about this, and it was hilarious. But when you're a parent, your body change, your mom, your body changes. You have your clothes, right? Whatever. So say you're 30 and you have your kid. You wake up at 40, okay, and you're like, a decade has gone by, and I've just been giving, giving, giving. So then you go back into your closet, and you're like, oh, my sweater from, what, yay. And I did that one time, and my daughter was like, and it was like an old Benetton. Remember that old brand Benetton,
Yeah.
right? Great expensive sweater. And I put it back on. I was like, still look at me. And my daughter said, Mom, can I borrow your sweater tomorrow? And I was like, oh, I am looking good. And she goes, it's ugly sweater day tomorrow.
Oh,
So I mean, talk about a gut punch, but I have a great humor. Like, I thought that was hilarious. And really what that tells you is, can you accept humor? Can you accept moments where the mirror is put on you? Can your ego take the hit? Do you have guilt? And so I spend a lot of time. In fact, in my book, I've broken the book out. In the first half of the book is your relationship with yourself, where I talk about ego and guilt and are you for sale? What do you stand for? These are things that are super important as a parent to have locked down. So in coaching and to set a parent free, I empower them to understand where to fill in the blanks for them to show up differently, how to have permission to let go of control and guilt, because that's what's holding a lot of these moms up. They've got this foggy wall that once we get through that, the behavior change with the kid about the little techniques of what I do. Okay, one, two, three, this, one, two, when I give you the tips and techniques, that's the easy part. So that's what I do to set them free is I do a lot of empowerment, self-empowerment. Um, and that's really fun and rewarding. And I love to see the magic happen because when the light goes on, I've got a single dad that I worked with, and I loved it because I was really fighting with him over controlling his teen daughter. He was really drilling down, and I was like, you got to let it go. I was helping him through the scenario. And he said, I walked away scratching my head, like, what is she even saying? But I'll do it. I paid for her time. I'm going to do it. And he goes, and that's when the magic happened. When I did what I thought I would never do, or why am I doing this? He said, that's when the magic happened. And what that really was letting go of control and stop, allowing her to make decisions and bringing the child into the fold and having them have a say and a voice and adding value to that. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes all it takes is a few sessions to open a parent's eyes and go, oh, I didn't know I could do that. You just need permission from another person who's been through it, right? Go, yeah,
Absolutely.
here, this works.
And what I'm finding, there are a lot of parents today who are now empty nesters and they feel like they failed. They're walking around with that guilt. Um, and they're watching their children go on having their lives and they're wondering, why aren't I part of it? And they too can benefit from the coaching because they taught their children to go on with their lives. They were never taught to go on with theirs. And so they're stuck. And that's exactly where I was. If it weren't for my son one day to say to me, Mom, why are you so depressed? And I
Oh,
yelled at him and I said, I'm not the one who's depressed. You're depressed. And he goes, No. He said, I've had depression, but you are depressed right now. And I looked at him. It was like, How dare you? And with that, the tears just came pouring
oh,
out.
oh.
And I realized he was right. I was depressed because I had been working so hard to be his mom. I wasn't enjoying it.
Mhm.
And I felt I was missing out. And as soon as those words came out, he said, Well, start enjoying it. And I didn't know what that meant, but then I started reading and researching and asking myself the question, okay, how can I enjoy it? And maybe it means I don't have to question everything he does. I was doing it because he was on the spectrum,
Yeah.
but he was typical. He
Mm.
could do things. So why was I questioning? And it was almost like that light went off. And that's what I tell parents is find that switch. It's not going to be easy, but once you find it, you have a beautiful life ahead of you, and your children are going to benefit from you getting well. And when I
Mhm.
say getting well, as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned, for almost 55 years, I was sick, okay?
Mhm.
Sick in
Mhm.
a way that I didn't know myself. And once I started to know myself, and it sounds like you knew yourself, but you had to take it just a little bit further out and
Yeah.
and do it just a little bit better. So tell us about the book. How can people find it and what can we find in that book?
Okay, it's on Amazon. So it's my under my name Sue Donnellan, Secrets to Parenting Without Giving an F. And I didn't come up with the title, the single dad did. He said, basically, you're telling me to parent without giving a fuck. And I'm like, yeah, 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 that's what I'm saying. Once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. So that's the title. It's on Amazon. And it's also, I have a link on my website, askmomparenting.com as well.
Well, we're going to put all that in the show notes. I want to wish you the best with your four children. It must be amazing in your household. Um, yeah, I was always told that I was going to have a multiple birth, and I didn't. I kept waiting for it, but I have two wonderful grown adult men in my life, and they are terrific. They are totally different, but they have helped me become the mom I am. So,
We got to be willing to listen. And I was going to say to you, both of them sound truly amazing. And my older son definitely kickstarted my journey with the way he responded to me when I was yelling. So I'm a, a big spiritual type of a person to where it's like, okay, you're here to teach me. You're a teacher for
Absolutely.
me right now, and I'm willing to listen and learn. So I think that's really special, especially your youngest who, at pivotal times in your life asked you key questions that put self-reflection into your mind. That is a gift. So all our children are gifts, and both of your sons are gifts, but what he did was something special.
Absolutely. Well, if you get to Cleveland to visit family, you know where we're located.
Okay.
So we hope to meet you soon. Take care,
Thank
Sue.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.